How has free agency set up the New York Giants draft? Where did the Giants still need to fill gaps in? And what about some of the moves that the team has made with their own free agents? All that and more with the amazing Nick Falato on today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Traina. Happy to have you with us. And as promised, we have the very handsome Nick Falato on the podcast. Nick Falato, of course, doing the draft profiles for Giants Country. He is also with Big Blue View. He's also with Big Blue Banter, his own podcast with Dan Schneier. He's all over the place. And if you're not following him, if you're not checking out his work, why the heck not? Seriously. I mean, just for those of you watching the video, just that smile alone makes it worth it. But anyway, Nick, my friend, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for hopping on with me.
Patty, you are too kind, but I absolutely appreciate it. And I always love to talk New York Giants football with you. So let's get into it, because this has been quite an off season. And I would say a pretty unique one, right? Going out and trading for a tight end like Darren Waller. I mean, it's not something that I expected heading into this offseason.
No, me either. Me either. But absolutely, we've got a whole lot of stuff to talk about today. Let's start off with some of these moves that the Giants have made. Now, Nick, I'm going to go back to Joe Schoen's season-ending presser. He basically told us what he was going to do. He talked about improving the run defense. He talked about putting pieces around Daniel Jones, who at the time wasn't signed, but of course they went and signed him. He talked about, just adding to beefing up the spots on the team that last year were just lacking. We could talk about the receiver core, which was lacking, the run defense, like I mentioned, the linebackers was a big problem. And thus far, that has been his approach with what he has done. So when you look at the moves that he has made, what are your overall thoughts about, what he's done so far?
So if we look at both the offense and the defense from last year, let's look first at the offense. What was the biggest vulnerability on the offense? It was their lack of explosive ability, specifically through the passing game. So you need to surround Daniel Jones, go out and get him a true wide receiver one, is what we all kind of suspected, right? We all thought they were going to go out and get a wide receiver one, but it didn't seem to be a wide receiver one on the market that Joe Schoen was willing to give up draft capital for, that the demand was there, right? Because you hear Jerry Jeudy, they want a first round pick. The Giants are going to give a first round pick up for Jerry Jeudy. Jerry Jeudy hasn't played up to a first round level. But then you have this guy, Darren Waller, who comes available for a third round pick. And you want to talk about explosive playmakers. He's a tight end. I get it, but he's your number one receiving option right now. And if he's fully healthy, Patty, as I'm sure you're well aware of, there's 3 tight ends in this league who might be more effective, quote unquote, than he is. But in terms of explosiveness, this is a former wide receiver. This is somebody who can stretch the seam. This is somebody who could stretch the defense vertically and horizontally. He should help the New York Giants' ability to create explosive plays, along with Saquon Barkley and another player that the Giants added in Paris Campbell. So many injuries throughout his career. But if you go back to his tape, 2018 at Ohio State, this is an explosive playmaker. He tested like that at the combine, and he clocked 22 miles per hour last year, north of 22 miles per hour. After all of those injuries, he's still like 25 years old. So if he's right, if he is healthy on this low cost deal, he can be another explosive weapon that can attack the field vertically at the third level, second level, into the intermediate with those deep digs and things like that. Or you can just do what the Colts did last year, because their offense sucked, and throw him a bunch of bubble screens and allow him to make people miss, because he's also kind of difficult to track down and take down. But then when we go to the defense, their biggest vulnerability, a critical vulnerability, Patty, they couldn't stop the run, specifically the power gap concepts. But they just could not stop the run last year because their linebackers were terrible and their defensive line did not have any depth. So you have Dexter Lawrence, this 350-pound dude playing 55 snaps a game. I would love to see him out there for every snap, but that's just not a prudent way to give somebody of that size, or to put somebody of that size out there that much, right? especially with Leonard Williams being injured last year, like we saw. So you go out and you sign Nacho. That is a veteran guy who can play all along the defensive line. They're sniffing around the A'Shawn Robinson market right now, which I really appreciate as well, because A'Shawn Robinson, he could be a starter. So you just want to add that type of depth to the defensive line, but the linebacker crew, Bobby Okereke is a legit starting linebacker who has all the athleticism that you need at that position. He has, I would say, coverage ability. He played in a lot of zone with Gus Bradley. He played in a lot of zone with Matt Eberflus. Now he's going to be asked to play man coverage. I think he has the type of body control and athletic ability to thrive in man coverage. And he's also really smart, really intelligent, and he's going to shore up that run defense. And I don't believe he's really been used as a pass rusher. He's going to be used as a pass rusher with Wink Martindale. And if you go back to his time at Stanford, he was, I would say, successful at doing that whenever he was asked to do that as a Stanford Cardinal. So I absolutely love the Bobby Okereke move. And I don't believe the Giants are probably done investing in the linebacker spot. Don't know where they will invest, whether it be another veteran free agent or somewhere in the draft. But all I know is right now, this Giants team, in terms of fixing their two critical vulnerabilities on each side of the football, it's been remedied. And I don't think they're done quite yet, Pat.
No, I don't think they're done either. I would not rule out another receiver, adding another receiver, a wide receiver, because, they did bring back Darius Slayton, which I'll admit was a bit of a surprise. I mean, I don't hate the move, but it was surprising. What was also kind of surprising is they brought back Sterling Shepard this early. Not that I hate the move, but Shepard right now, I don't think he could pass a physical. And I'm like, he didn't have a market. What was the rush to bring him back? You could have maybe let him continue with his rehab and then see where you were at later on. But that, they brought him back. And speaking of which, you look at the Slayton transaction, and especially what Slayton went through with, taking a pay cut and, being buried. The overall message I think this front office is sending to the players is a positive one, because think about it for a minute here. Slayton was rewarded in a way for being a trooper. Shepard, even though he got hurt, he hung around and did what he could to help. He was rewarded. I mean, that's a storyline I don't think a lot of people are really thinking about, that I think is very important, because it sends a message to not only the guys you have on the team now, but maybe guys you might want to recruit later on, that we're going to be fair with you. If you do what you're supposed to, even if your circumstances aren't ideal, we're going to be fair with you.
Absolutely. And Bobby Okereke kind of alluded to that. He said, I love New York City, but I saw what the Giants were cultivating in week 17 when we played them. I want to go and play for Brian Daboll. And the Giants are becoming a team. And since I've covered this team, they have not been this, a team that other players around the National Football League want to go and play for. And in terms of Darius Slayton, I was the same as you. I don't want to say shocked, but I was a little surprised, but I understand it, because he did everything right. He did not complain. He was running like third team during training camp, but written off, did not have a catch until the Chicago game. And then he became the, I would say, most important part of the Giants passing offense. I know there were a lot of injuries. I get that. But still, when you look back at the explosive plays that the 2022 Giants ended up having, few and far between, but they were mostly Darius Slayton. Darius Slayton, he'll still be that track star on the team, running 9-route, stretching the defense to open up things for Wan'Dale Robinson, Darren Waller, and Paris Campbell now, and even Saquon Barkley. But in terms of Sterling Shepard, I'm thinking the Giants brought him back maybe just so he could rehab in their facility now, which is really the ultimate ode to him. It's an honor for him, because they can really monitor him. They can make sure that he has NFL type of doctors and all that type of stuff, which I'm not certain if he would have been able to go back to the Giants facility if he was unsigned. So I think that's probably the reason the Giants did that. And it's low cost. And dude, is there a better hype man in the world than Sterling Shepard? Like that guy was getting so amped up for every single game. And I'm glad that he's back, because he's been one of my favorite Giants that I've covered.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Sterling has just been, what more can you ask? And, just going back to Slayton for a second, when he was on the call with us the other day, kudos to him for saying, I contributed to my circumstances at the start of the year, taking accountability, which is why I keep saying on Twitter and articles and on the podcast, I respect this guy. I mean, is he a true number one receiver? No, but he's accountable and he's functional and he's got a good attitude. And I think the organization appreciates that. Now, speaking of guys with good attitudes, I was sad to see Nick Gates leave. I'm not going to lie. The Giants lose Nick Gates. John Feliciano, surprisingly, I thought he was going to be back. He goes to San Francisco. Nick, what are they doing at center? I mean, they might as well take a billboard here and scream out, we're going to draft the center, because I think that's what they're going to do. But do they, right now, I think initially the plan was, okay, we bring back one of the veteran centers as a stopgap, bring in a kid, maybe not a first rounder, but maybe a second rounder or a third rounder, and just, get them ready. And then at some point transition. Now they don't have that plan right now. They don't have a veteran. The closest they have is Ben Bredesen, who played 30 snaps at center last year. And, it's something, but it's not a lot. What do they do now at center? I mean, the draft, obviously, it's going to be addressed, but what about the veteran aspect? Or can they get by without a veteran aspect?
I would imagine that you'd want to invest in a veteran. I like Ben Bredesen and I like Josh Azudu, and Mark Lewinsky's more than likely going to start at right guard, and he's sufficient. He's adequate. I wish he was a little bit better in pass protection, but you don't want to go into the season just relying on Ben Bredesen at center, somebody who's also been injured here and there a little bit throughout his career. So you're going to have to either get a veteran guy, which I think that's probably the direction they're going to go in. They're going to get somebody a la a John Feliciano from last year, or invest a day 2, maybe even a day 3 pick, depending on who you love in the center market. I don't necessarily think they will go center at pick 25. I think they could go wide receiver, but I'm leaning more towards the cornerback position when you just look at all the talent at cornerback. I don't think they're precluded from going wide receiver. It just makes sense to go cornerback because there's probably going to be like 3 or 4 really good cornerbacks who are going to be available at 25. And I like Cordell Flott. I like Aaron Robinson, but are you relying on them to be your number 2 or cornerbacks going into a Wink Martindale coach defense? I'm not really 100% certain, but I also don't think the Giants pigeonhole themselves into those types of situations either. We're like, we got to take this, we got to take that. So I think they might look at a guy like Joe Tippmann from Wisconsin. I mean, there's players like that. There's players later on in the draft that I still have yet to cover for Giants country. Everyone go check that out. But I'm going to be looking much more extensively at the center position now that John Feliciano and Nick Gates aren't there, because I expected one of them to be brought back. Nick Gates, look, the Giants were going to give him that contract. God bless him. I think that's awesome for him. He's a great story. But the John Feliciano, I haven't even seen the contract details, but it was a 1-year deal to be a backup over there in San Francisco. But I feel like he would have been a starter here, and maybe the Giants, there was no market there, and they're just looking at another veteran at the moment, and they're just waiting to free up money or extend somebody, and that's a whole nother situation. But it's the center position has now become a much more important part of the draft for the New York Giants.
You look at maybe a Ben Jones, who I know the Titans released, but he had injury issues. Another guy maybe to look at is Ryan Kelly over with the Colts. There's reports that they want to move on from him. And if they can't find a trade partner, maybe they release him. Mitch Morse is another guy up in Buffalo. Maybe he gets released. I think he had some injury issues last year as well. So I think the Giants are monitoring that. I mean, I can't see why they wouldn't. But certainly, that's a position that they need to address, because right now, I would like to see them get a young guy in, because now you've got Andrew Thomas, who's still on the rookie deal, albeit not for much longer. Evan Neal's on a rookie deal. You figure if Josh Azudu can beat, if he's healthy and he can win that left guard job, he'll be on a rookie deal. You put a center on a rookie deal. That's 4/5 of your line on rookie deals. They can mature together. And when was the last time this line had continuity from year to year? You'd have to go back, I'd want to say, to 2007, 8, 9, and 10, when they had the same 5 guys?
Yeah.
And continuity is important.
Let's see if we can remember them all. Chris Snee, Sean O'Hara, Kareem McKenzie,
David Deal,
obviously.
And Seibert.
Yeah, and Richie Seibert. Yeah. And it was like that for a little while. And then they all started getting older, and I just felt like the Giants never found a way to fully replenish, or at least successfully replenish. They waited way too long, and then they started forcing themselves into draft picks like Eric Flowers a few years after that. And then next thing you know, Eli Manning's at the tail end of his career, Patty, and he has Eric Flowers and Bobby Hart blocking for him. Like, just a terrible situation to find yourself in when you're an immobile quarterback.
Hey, Giant fans, if you haven't downloaded the FanDuel Sportsbook app, what are you waiting for? It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. And right now is a perfect time to download America's #1 sportsbook app, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 if their first bet doesn't win. Download the FanDuel Sportsbook app from the App Store or you can go to fanduel.com/lockedon. And don't forget to take advantage of their no sweat first bet. FanDuel allows you to bet on everything from the money line to point scores to the spread and more. Plus, they even let you combine bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same game parlay. So don't miss this chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to fanduel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Hey, Giant fans, thanks for making the Locked On Giants podcast your first listen or watch every day. Now make your second listen Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes. From free agency to the draft to salary cap management and more, join NFL experts Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino as they take you through what it's like to build a successful NFL franchise on their show every Monday through Friday. Find Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Nick, let's talk about an area that I don't think a lot of people are talking about, but was also an Achilles heel for this team last year. Special teams. Now, I know a lot of people were surprised that the Giants brought back Jamie Gillen. I know I was maybe one of them at first, but upon further reflection, what did he have for gunners last year? I think they went through a lot of different gunners. Special teams wasn't very good. So you look at some of these signings that they made. Jeff Smith, the wide receiver. They're looking at. There's another guy that they were bringing in today. Name
Boyd.
Escapes. I'm sorry.
Chris Boyd from Minnesota.
Yes, Chris. All right. So another special teamer. That's an area they're looking to beef up as well. I mean, we can't forget about that unit at all because special teams just hasn't really been good for the last, few years. I mean, do you agree? I mean, I know usually the guys at the bottom of the depth chart make up the special team, but it's an important part.
I can't remember which year it was, Patty, when Thomas McGahee's unit was actually like really solid, and we're like, oh, okay. Then
it was before Joe Judge.
It was before Joe Judge. It was 2019, I believe, right? Pat Shurmur's last year as the head coach. And then 2020, we're like, hey, we get Joe Judge. He's all about the special teams. They look and they invest a bunch of picks into possible special teams types of players. And the funny thing is, I feel like some of those special teams players are good special teams players when you watch them, Cam Brown and Carter Coughlin specifically, but the unit in general sucked. And the unit in general would just blow these punt returns and these kick returns to just flip the field position in these competitive, like 19 to 17 games, because our offense absolutely was garbage under Jason Garrett. So it just led to these unnecessary losses. And last year it was a little bit concerning in terms of Jamie Gillen. Jamie Gillen has an absolute rocket for a leg. It's just, I feel like his accuracy is what's a little bit problematic. He sent it into the back of the end zone a couple times where you're like, oh man, you got to pin him, man. You got to pin him, field position. But in general, they bring him back. I think there's a lot of development. If you can hone in on that kid's ability to use precision as a punter, then you're talking about somebody who can absolutely flip the field when your offense stalls out in its own end. You're backed up on your own 15-yard line. He can put it at the other 15-yard line with a really good punt. So I understand from that perspective. And it's not like I feel like there's a lot of punters just kind of sitting around waiting to get signed from teams. So that's probably one big reason why they retained him. And I'm just all about getting gunners. I'm all about getting competent special teams players. The Michael Thomases of the world, Patricia Traina, those players, not the Nate Ebners. There's no shot at Nate Ebner, but he came in here and he was a little bit long in the tooth at the time. And the Giants allowed Michael Thomas to leave. And now Michael Thomas just signed with another team and he's still kicking ass in the NFL.
Yeah, one of my favorite people, by the way. Still follow him, still stay in touch with him. It broke my heart to see him leave. So you're preaching to the choir. Nick, let's backtrack a little bit here and talk about the two big contracts. Well, actually, one big contract in the franchise tag. Daniel Jones getting the 4-year, $160 million deal. It's not really a true $40 million per year deal when you break it down, but overall, when you look at the deal he got and the progress he made, do you kind of see the two marrying up, or do you think the Giants just overspent a little on him?
I don't think they overspent on him when you look into the fine details of the contract. And the devil is always in the detail, Patty. And you look at that, the Giants can get out of that contract relatively unscathed in a few seasons, right? Relatively. And then after, I think, year 3, they can get out of it basically, and it's not going to impact them long term. So what is your other option right now for Daniel Jones? Daniel Jones showed significant progress under Brian Daboll. And yes, the coaching was elite, but you know what? That's what happens in the NFL. You receive better coaching. You can maximize your skill set, because Jason Garrett, I feel like that set Daniel Jones back. He showed some promise under Pat Shurmur. You bring in Jason Garrett, you're like, hey, you're going to do full field progressions. You're going to run a bunch of stick, a bunch of curls, and a bunch of things like that. We're not really going to leverage your ability to use your legs all that often. And injuries also plagued him, in fairness to Jason Garrett as well. But now Brian Daboll comes in, and what did we see? Always on the move, right? A lot of zone read to hold the backside defender to open up rushing lanes for Saquon Barkley. A lot of creativity in the red zone. I mean, the Giants were 32nd and 31st under Jason Garrett in terms of red zone efficiency. And under Mike Kafka, they were top 10. And think back to this season, how many touchdowns to Daniel Bellinger. Daniel Bellinger had a rushing touchdown against the Green Bay Packers. Like, they were really creative in the red zone, and they took advantage of the fact that defenses, especially towards the end of the season, they were like, Saquon Barkley is great. 26 is amazing, no doubt. But Daniel Jones, we have to worry about 8, because 8 will abuse us, and 8 will pick up 70 yards. He'll pick up 8, 7, 6, 10, 15 yards, and that's going to add up. And we saw that. How many times when Daniel Jones didn't love his first read or his second read, because there were a lot of half-field reads with this offense as well, he just took the B gap. So, hey, you want to run high side on Evan Neal, you want to try to beat Evan Neal with speed, which a lot of defensive edge rushers did, we're going to run in the B gap, and Daniel Jones is going to pick up 7, 8 yards here, and it worked a lot. It just, as Hank Stram would say, matriculated the football down the field. But my issues with Daniel Jones, and I feel like hopefully he can, with a little bit more time with Brian Daboll, he can become a little bit more aggressive. Yes, the turnovers were down this year. Absolutely love that. You had to bring them down. That was Jason Garrett's main point coming in. And to Jason Garrett's credit, he did that, but at what expense, right? Sometimes you got to let the guys throw the football, because creating explosive plays is one of the number one reasons why teams have success on the offensive side of the damn football, Patty. So he needs to, for me, to throw with a little bit more anticipation. Become a more anticipatory passer of the football on deeper concepts and attack the sideline a little bit more. Daniel Jones from the pocket, between the hashes, didn't make a ton of throws outside the numbers on number 2-7 routes, smash type of concepts, attacking the honey hole whenever they faced a cover 2 type defense, which they faced a decent amount down the stretch of the season. So I want to see just a little bit more of, okay, I diagnosed pre to post snap. I see what the defense is doing. I confirm it. Now I know that receiver, my number 2 receiver to the field side, is going to run that 7 route. He's going to beat that safety to the set point. Let me throw it before he gets out of his break. That's something I haven't seen consistently with Daniel Jones yet. I feel like it is a fair criticism with Daniel Jones. I feel like he can grow into that a little bit. But I'll also say this, if he figures that out, you're talking about a quarterback who doesn't have a lot of weak points. If he figures that out, because he has all the physical tools. He has all the athletic ability, and I feel like he can make all the throws. Is he Pat Mahomes? Is he Justin Herbert? No, but he could still make all the NFL throws. He can make those throws from the far hash to the sideline. He has the physical capability to do it. Now he just needs to kind of had the confidence to do it and put the mental side of it together in order to consistently threaten defenses. Because the way Jack Del Rio of Washington played Daniel Jones specifically in that second game, it was a lot of disrespect. It was like, dude, you're not going to throw to the field side. You're not going to throw to the field side to the sidelines. We're hardly going to allocate any of our coverage to that way. So next year, when defenses start doing that to you, Daniel, make them pay. And I know he has the capability to do so.
Yeah. Great summary, by the way. I was actually going to ask you where you need to see Daniel Jones grow. And of course, the other thing is we need to make sure this year he got through the year without missing time due to injuries. So we got to hope that last year wasn't, an outlier and that this is the start of moving forward. He's going to be on the field and not in the trainer's room, for part or games here or there, so that was big. Saquon, let's talk about Saquon, because not surprised that he got the franchise tag. Once Daniel signed Saquon, you knew he was going to get the franchise tag. I am a little surprised though that, the reports came out that he was offered about $12.5 million a year. I think the Giants went as high as 13. And, I'd gotten confirmation on that. Didn't take it. In a class where the draft class of running backs is deep, the veteran market is not that strong. I mean, Saquon, to me, I think overplayed it. But let's start, though, with his play, because obviously he stayed healthy. Wasn't used as much in the passing game as I thought he would be, certainly not like he was as in his rookie campaign. What did you see from Saquon's game that just, if you're the agent, you're saying he's worth, Christian McCaffrey money?
I would say probably before the bye week, it was just how important and vital he was to the offense. I mean, everyone has, I guess, recent or not recency bias, but they think of week one. And then sometimes they're like, hey, remember what happened in week one? Like that was insane, especially because the Giants pulled off this huge upset in week one. That was mostly because of Saquon Barkley. Yeah, you had the long touchdown pass to Sterling Shepard, but Barkley was gigantic in that game. And just seeing him healthy again was just a great, it was fantastic for Giant fans because he had the season where he tore his ACL in 2020. And then last year he was just plagued by injuries and was not the same. I think it would be if I'm Saquon Barkley's agent, you're just being like, hey, this first half of the season, it's all been Saquon Barkley. And then even after the bye week against Houston, it was 35 carries of Saquon Barkley? That is a lot of carries. Patricia, 36 touches. So the offense revolved around him. But then once Isaiah Hodgins got ingratiated into the offense a little bit, you started seeing a little bit more of a transition away from 12 personnel and more towards 11 personnel and more towards a quick passing attack. That also coincided, to be fair, with the Giants playing Minnesota, who sucked defending the pass, and the Colts towards the end of the season, who basically clocked out towards the end of that year, and then Philadelphia in week 18 when none of the Giants starters even ended up playing. But the Giants' ability to kind of transition to a quick passing attack out of 11 personnel kind of gave Saquon Barkley this role where he was only receiving like 12 carries, 11 carries a game, which wasn't that much comparatively to what he was receiving earlier in the season. But I'll also say this, if you look at like the EPA, like the expected points added, the Giants were running the football better out of 11 personnel than they were out of 12 personnel in those games against Washington towards the latter half of the season, but not quite once they were really dominant passing the football. So Saquon was still running the football effectively. It's just the Giants used a lot of quick momentum, a lot of quick tempo, and they would use Saquon Barkley, I would say, as just a threat out of the backfield to stretch linebackers and get them out of position to open up the middle of the field for little spot routes and little curl routes and just half field reads and things of that nature. But if I'm to go back to your original question, I'm just saying it was the reliance earlier in the season. It was the fact that Saquon Barkley had 164 yards against Tennessee. He had 146 against Chicago. He had 110 against Jacksonville. Like, remember that last drive against Jacksonville? Mike Kafka called the same exact play, 6 or 7 times. He flipped it once, and then one other time he just allowed Daniel Jones to take it on a naked. So that would be my reason. But I agree with you. He overplayed his hand. Like, I don't know if he's going to get 12 and or he's not going to get 12 and a half or 13. He wouldn't have gotten 12 and a half, 13. I don't think on the open market. Once you see a lot of these teams trying to get away from Dalvin Cook's contract, they're trying, or they did cut Ezekiel Elliott, the Dallas Cowboys. And I think that was his bargaining chip. I was like, yeah, Ezekiel Elliott's making $15 million. Like, I have to get something around that. Right. Yeah. But I'm glad Joe Shane showed the discipline to stand pat. And it's one of the things I love most about him as a general manager.
Yes. He didn't panic. He didn't panic when he had to, when faced with the opportunity to trade for one wide receiver, didn't panic with Saquon. Absolutely love his discipline. So one of the other things that Joe Shane spoke about at the end of the year was closing the gap between the Giants and the Eagles and the Cowboys. When you look at the moves that have been made so far, how would you assess that progress that they've made in closing the gap with those two NFC East opponents?
Well, I think they're an improved football team right now, the New York Giants. I still think they have glaring holes, but that's what the NFL draft is for. And I trust this front office and this coaching staff to collaborate and find the best pieces to maximize this roster. So I would say the gap has been closed. You look at Dallas, I would say they're a little bit, are they worse off? Maybe, because they lost Zeke, but they still added Brendan Cooks, who I feel like one of their biggest liabilities on offense was, it's like CeeDee Lamb, and then we're throwing to Noah Brown, who
they missed Amari Cooper.
They missed Amari Cooper. So now you bring in Brandon Cooks. You lost Dalton Schultz, though, so you're going to have Jake Ferguson or Peyton Hendershot step up. And I like Jake Ferguson coming out of the draft last year out of Wisconsin, so maybe he can step up and seize that opportunity. But overall, they didn't get substantially better, right? Oh, I'll say this, though. So this one slipped my mind. Stephon Gilmore. That's one move that when I saw it, I was so mad at the Colts. And I was like, that is such a great move for Dallas. So I don't want to backtrack on that, but that is a huge addition because now you have Stephon Gilmore, who's getting a little older, but at the same time, he played well last year, from my understanding. And you have Trevon Diggs on the other side. So that defense, which isn't running I'm Dan Quinn, all I run is cover 3. It's not what that defense is. That defense runs a lot of man coverage. They're a very man-heavy defense. You have 2 outside cornerbacks who can thrive doing that, Patty. So a little bit worried about that defense. I was always worried about that defense. But we'll have to see on the offensive side of the football when it comes to Dallas. In terms of Philadelphia, they were able to retain Slay. They were able to retain Bradbury, but they lost Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. They were able to retain Brendan Graham and Fletcher Cox, but they also lost Isaac Seumalo on offense. They lost, I want to say, another defensive lineman. Javon Hargrave ended up going to the 49ers. They lost TJ Edwards. So they lost a lot of pieces.
And they lost their two coordinators.
And they lost their two coordinators, which is one of those unwritten things. And that's another point on Dallas's side. They lost Kellen Moore, who I always had a lot of respect for because love Wink Martindale back. Wink Martindale lost twice to Dallas Cowboys and lost twice to Kellen. And remember week 3 against Chicago? It's like Kellen Moore knew exactly what to do against the Giants. They just ran like crack toss the whole game. And they're like, okay, your edge rushers are young. Your edge rushers aren't going to know exactly what to do. And your linebackers suck. So we're going to take advantage of that. And that's exactly what happened. Now Kellen Moore's not there. So it's going to be a lot of pressure on Mike McCarthy, who's going to be calling the plays and be a head coach, which isn't always a recipe for success, Patty. So Dallas is a little bit, I'm looking at them and I'm like, the Giants did close the gap, certainly, but did they get worse off? It depends on how you want to look at it. But Philadelphia definitely got worse off. It's just the gap between Philadelphia and the Giants last year was substantial. It was a substantial gap.
Grand Canyon like that.
Yeah, it was a Grand Canyon type of gap there between us and Philadelphia, unfortunately. But they definitely, the gap has been closed. And I got to say this, man, the New York Giants were able to go to the playoffs and win 9 football games last year, winning 1 divisional game. 1. So if the Giants can just win 3 divisional games, 3, maybe even 4, because Washington's also in this division, then you're talking about a team that I feel like can go back to the playoffs. But there's no chance the Giants are going back to the playoffs next year if they win 1 game, because the Giants swept the AFC South. The Giants were excellent against teams that were not in their division, but they lost every game except for that last Washington game. And then they tied the 1-2, obviously, against Washington. But they need to find ways to defeat Philadelphia and Dallas, at least at home. Got to win those matchups.
Yes, absolutely. And, you mentioned the draft coming up. Certainly, I'll probably ask you down the line when I have you back on again, how the gap has narrowed down. Let me ask you, the Giants are continuing to do stuff in free agency as we record this. They don't have a lot of money, though. I think they had, according to Over the Cap, as of Wednesday morning, they had under $1 million in effective cap space, which means right now, any guys they bring in, they got to basically have them on a minimum deal so they can swap out somebody in the top 51 for someone, coming in. So that leads me to a question or a topic we were actually talking about before we started taping, and that's Leonard Williams. Leonard Williams is, I think, going to be 29. He's had injuries in each of the last 2 years. Still a very good player, but he's in the final year of his contract. He's got a $32 million cap hit. What do you do with Leonard Williams? I mean, obviously I think they would like to extend him, but if you can't extend him, what do you do? Do you cut him and just swallow it, or do you just bite the bullet here?
It's such an interesting situation with Leonard Williams. I think Leonard Williams is still a very good football player, not just a good one when he's healthy. And this guy's like never injured. It was really just last year. And even last year, he had over 40 pressures. He had 42 pressures. And now he is, if you want to use this terminology, which is kind of lazy, but the second fiddle to Dexter Lawrence, because Dexter Lawrence is more so, I would say, a dominant player at this point of his career. But can you imagine a healthy Leonard Williams next to Dexter Lawrence, now with Nacho and possibly Ashawn Robinson? Like, that is an elite rotation right there for the New York Giants, for Wink Martindale, who loves to rotate his players. He's been doing it since he was a coordinator with Baltimore. He likes to have a nice, strong rotation. Who the hell were the Giants going to rotate in there last year? I mean, they rotated guys, but it was not good. And I don't want to take any shots at any of the former players from the 2022 season, but none of those guys should have been rotating and playing as many snaps as they did behind players like Dexter Lawrence and Leonard Williams. So if you were able to have Nacho and Ashawn in there, it will significantly help the Giants' run defense, which, as we said, critical vulnerability. But Leonard Williams, I still think he has football in his tank. I do. I mean, he's going to be 29 at the start of the season. He's 28 right now. His birthday's in June. But I don't know with that $32 million cap number. I think that has to come down somehow. I'm open to restructuring, because you can play as a defensive lineman, especially someone like Leonard Williams, who, yes, he's a good athlete for his size, but he's also incredibly long. He plays with a low center of gravity. He has good technique and fundamentals. It's not like he's just relying on things that will be diminishing, like his athletic ability, right? So I've always appreciated the game. I'm hoping he's back, but you can't go into the season having Leonard Williams be the second highest paid non-quarterback in the league. in terms of what he's making this year. $32 million is an insane amount of number. Is an insane number for Leonard Williams. It's higher than the AAV on Aaron Donald's contract, I believe. It's just obviously because of the structure of Leonard Williams' deal, his extension before. But
the result of that, the reason why I got to that is because they restructured him twice.
I know.
Which,
and I talked about this on another podcast on Big Blue Banter, but think about the reason why the Giants did that with Leonard Williams. It was to have cap space for the 2021 free agent cycle so they could afford Kenny Golladay. So it's just like cascading amounts of depression that are falling at Giants fans' feet right now. And it's still affecting our front office.
Yeah. Kenny Golladay, the gift that keeps on giving.
Poor guy.
Yeah.
I mean that sarcastically, but
yeah, exactly. I mean, but to that, just back to the point here, Nick, I mean, obviously the answer is to extend Leonard, but thus far, at least, there hasn't been any whisper. I know that was something that Joe Schoen talked about doing. He also talked about maybe getting a long-term deal done with Dexter to get some cap space. Absent of those two things happening, we just saw Daron Payne down in Washington get a huge deal, which I think kind of reset the market for defensive tackles. If you're the Giants, where are you getting the money to move forward? You're going to have to get the money someplace. You're going to need about $3 million or so to sign your draft class alone. They have less than $1 million as of this recording. So if Leonard digs in and says, okay, you know what, maybe I don't want to redo my deal. I just want to play through it and be a free agent. If you can't get something done with Dexter, you got to hope Saquon comes to his senses because, you can maybe knock that $10 million down, but still that's not a lot of money. What do you do if you're Joe Schoen to get this money? Where are you looking for it other than your couch?
And if you make him a post-June cut, Leonard Williams, if it came down to that, and that's an if, and I hope that's not the case. I believe you gain 18 million on the cap, but then suffer a $14.5 million cap hit this year. And then you have some dead cap for the next season as well, which is like 5.9 or something. Do you really want to eat that type of dead cap? I mean, yes, it's going to create cap space. You can sign free agents in your draft class and veteran free agents if you want to add anybody at that point of the year. But I don't want it to come down to that. And I look at like a Dory Jackson. Do you dare extend him again and kick the money back like you already did last year? It's like he's the name that kind of comes out to me. I'm like, I don't know if they want to do that though. Like, is that the
not with this corner class? I mean, you got a deep corner class in this draft. Look, I like Dory Jackson, but if you look at his stats, I think he's had one or two interceptions, not a whole lot of big plays. And people say, well, teams don't throw at him a whole lot. The numbers say otherwise. So for what you're paying, are you really getting your money's worth, especially knowing that this year's cornerback class in the draft is so deep that you could probably get 2 starters for the future if you wanted to.
Good. Yeah, you absolutely could. And speaking just on the cornerback class, I think that the Giants are going to find a way to upgrade that nickel spot. Like, I don't think Darnay Holmes isn't in the long-term plans here in New York, but he's also a player who's in his last year of his deal he's entering. I wouldn't be shocked if the Giants, even high in the draft, even if they go cornerback at 25, they could double down. And I know that it depends on how they feel about Cordell Flott. I like Cordell Flott. Depends on what they even think about Aaron Robinson, if they even have strong opinions, because they didn't really see him all that often last year. But those are the young corners that we have. And then they also signed, I believe, Leonard Johnson to a 3-year deal. I haven't received the contract information.
It was a standard UDFA contract for him because he missed last year. I think he got injured before he actually got to the draft. So this would be like a standard UDFA contract. This wasn't, he was that impressive. So
yeah. So like you have players like that, players who you're intrigued by, but you might not pencil in as starters this season. So I think the nickel spot, and there's some good nickels in this class too, man. There's some good guys who played outside who could project well to the nickel spot. There's a lot of guys who would play both positions in college. So I just feel like the secondary, it's something we've talked about since the Giants hired Wink Martindale. And it's something I know Ed Valentine has brought up on his podcast. It's something that I feel too. Like, in my opinion, and I think you share this opinion as well, Patty, correct me if I'm wrong, there's no chance Kayvon Thibodeau would be a Giant right now if the Jets went another direction. I think it would have been Sauce Gardner. There's no doubt about it. It would have
Yes.
easily have been Sauce, and Sauce would have thrived in this system. He would have been excellent. And I still think the Giants are looking for another cornerback because they're aware of the fact that Dory Jackson's getting a little older and he might not be here for the next 3 to 4 years or anything like that. So you need to find those young corners who can thrive in Wink Martindale's system. And even if Wink Martindale's not here, you still need cornerbacks who can cover in man coverage in those 3rd and 6, in those 3rd and 5, 3rd and 4 type of situations. So cornerbacks definitely high on my priority list personally.
Yes. And I agree with you. I think they could double dip, and I would not be surprised if they double dip. So that being said, Nick, since we're on the topic of the draft, if you're the Giants, and, I know pro days are still going on, I know free agency is still going on, but if you had to guess the top 3 picks, and I'll give you my prediction too, you can tell me if you agree or disagree. I'm thinking you can't rule out receiver at 25, but I'm thinking cornerback, offensive line, and receiver in that order. Am I crazy, or do you agree?
No, I don't think you're crazy. I also don't think, I think Joe Schoen is somewhat going to operate with a BPA type approach, but I think he also values those positions more: wide receiver, cornerback, offensive line, maybe defensive line, depending on what happens with Leonard Williams. And if they believe he's going to be on the roster, I think defensive line could be in there. I don't know how much Joe Schoen is going to value at 25. I'm talking day 2 is totally different. Safety. In this class, it's not the deepest safety, or it's not the strongest safety class.
Which they don't. They probably. I mean, they could probably get by with what they have with safety. Pinnock played well. Trenton Thompson. They got Dane Belton, Xavier McKinney. If he gets that hand right again, so he could probably get away without getting a safety.
And they just signed Bobby McCain,
right? Bobby McCain,
who I've always respected. I thought the Giants were going to sign him back. I think it was like 2020 when the Giants brought in Patrick Graham, because I believe he was a free agent coming off of the Dolphins, but he ended up going to Washington for a few seasons. And I've always respected Bobby McCain's game. And I think he'll transition well to what they want to do as a rotational safety, along with Jason Pinnock. Allow them to battle it out, and maybe the cream rise to the top if the Giants don't invest in the safety position, or maybe Dane Belton. That would be excellent too. Right. But the interior offensive line is something I think they need to fix or figure out. Right guard, you don't have a long-term situation there. You don't have an answer. You have Mark Lewinsky for this season, and I know he's under contract for the next season, but you can get out of that relatively unscathed. And if he plays the way he played last year, I think you more than likely want to get out of that contract, and you would like to have another young player in there. So interior offensive line, I could see that a day 2 type of option. Center, hopefully a little bit more geared towards somebody who has that ability to play center, but I feel like there's a lot of guards in this class who are like Steve Avila from TCU, Osiris Torrance from Florida. Steve Avila has played multiple different positions, but he
plays center too.
Yeah, exactly. He projects to be a little bit more as a guard. But for me, I think cornerback, as I said, I wouldn't be shocked if it's wide receiver, but I don't think you're in a situation where you're like, oh, I'm definitely going to want to get one of those wide receivers, because it seems like there could be a Jordan Addison's. Like, I don't know if JSN is going to be there, like Jackson Smith and Jigba. I'm imagining he's probably going to be selected by that point, but I would absolutely love that. Even though the Giants got Wan'Dale Robinson last year, who's a slot only guy. I'm a bit fascinated by what Joe Schoen is going to do. Linebacker, like, I look at Jack Campbell. He's a linebacker that I would want, but now that you signed Okereke, 25 is a little rich for me. You can probably get like the kid from Tulane, Dorian Williams, a little bit later on in the draft and be happy. So if I had to pick, it's corner though at 25, just because there's so many cornerbacks in this draft class that I think the Giants will have the pick of like 4 or 5 guys who are going to be selected around that range that still could be available, because the Christian Gonzalez's of the world, he's going to be off the board. Maybe Witherspoon will be off the board, but you still got like Deontay Banks, Julius Brents, Keely Ringo. There's a lot of players there who I think the Giants will be interested in.
Agree. And like I said, double dip, because you're going to get 2 young cornerbacks that you can have them grow old with, because I don't know that Aaron Robinson's the long-term answer. Guy keeps getting hurt, maybe, who knows, maybe you move him back to the slot, because that's where he played in college. Maybe you put him back there in the slot. Adoree Jackson, you carry this year, obviously, but I don't know that he's going to be, long-term where he gets another contract. So why wouldn't you take the advantage of a deep class to kind of build things up a little bit? So final question for you, Nick. What would be one thing that would be surprising, whether it be draft or free agency, that the Giants might do, but really makes sense in the long run?
Ooh, really makes sense in the long run. Okay, so I think it would be surprising for the Giants to pick a running back at 57.
Ooh.
Yeah. And that would make sense in the long run if Saquon Barkley does not come back to the Giants because they can't figure out the contract situation. And the running backs that I have in mind for that pick it would be Zach Charbonnet. I'm going to start there. Zach Charbonnet, I feel like he's not a home run threat. So for that, people might not find him as sexy around like a 4.53, but he does so many little things right. And I believe he's a deceptively good athlete in terms of his short area ability. And just, he makes angles for defenders very tough. He makes those tackle attempts very tough, just the way he angles his body and his ability to avoid contact and run through contact. And I also think at that point in the draft, I think that might be a little bit rich for Tajee Spears, kid from Tulane, but he's another running back that has caught my eye that I appreciate. You got Jahmyr Gibbs from Alabama as well. But I would say that's something where I'm like, I would rather allocate that draft pick to another position because there's still holes on this roster. There's still going to be good players at 57. But if the Giants were to call Zach Charbonnet's name, say at that point, I'd be like, okay, well, a little surprised, but that means, in my opinion, Saquon's done with the New York Giants.
I would have said running back too, but in the second round, I would have said third round maybe for running back because
it was bold though. It's meant to be bold.
All right. Well, hey, that's fine. I mean, it certainly, I agree with you. I mean, if Saquon's going to dig in and, say, look, I'm not playing on the tag or hold out or whatever, which I could see happening, by the way, if they're going to insist on wanting more money than what the Giants have on the table. Saquon, I hope they work it out, but I don't know. I'm very curious to see, because now not only do you have, a question mark about this year. I mean, you could tag him again next year if you needed to, I suppose, but now it creates distraction if you think about it, especially if he holds out.
And he's also a beloved player, and he's done everything right. Face of the franchise. John Mara loves him. There's a lot that is in Saquon Barkley's favor. But I'll also say this. Like 57 is too rich for me at running back, especially in this class where you can get somebody a little bit later on. Like we've seen teams do, like Elijah Mitchell was what, a 6th round pick, Khalil Herbert, 4th round pick, Ramondre Stevenson, 4th round pick, Isaiah Pacheco, 7th round pick. You don't need to invest high draft capital into the running back position right now, which was the whole Saquon Barkley argument from back in 2018. But Saquon is a fantastic player, fantastic face of the franchise. Let's see if he's retained for the long term.
Yeah. I mean, I hope they work it out because, like I said, they got to get money somewhere. And that would be the first place I'd start, obviously try and get something done with Leonard Williams. And I'll tell you what, one thing nobody's mentioning is last year they didn't want to cut James Bradberry. They had no choice. They needed that money. And my concern is that they might end up in a similar situation where if they can't get Saquon's number down, if they can't get something done with Dexter, they might have to move on from Leonard. And if that happens, now what do you do? Do you plug in Nacho there? Do you go defensive line? I mean, now you're creating a huge hole on that defensive line that, the cap situation this year has been better, but it's still not ideal because you still have the remnants from 2 years ago kicking in now.
Absolutely.
And I have no idea. And I've looked at this, believe me, I look at the cap all the time. I have no idea how they're going to address all this. It's going to be a very, very interesting crossroad, I think, for Joe Schoen to approach. And, unless, like you said, unless they get Saquon done. And even then, is that going to be enough to lower that number from 10 to maybe about 4 or something like that? I'll give you $6 million, half of which you're going to need for the draft class. You're still not going to have enough to get you through the rest of the year. Where's that money going to come from?
That's just the immediate ramifications of this. What's it going to look like 2 years from now after this season? Because the Giants are pushing so much of this cap back, and you have Daniel Jones making virtually nothing this year, but later on in his contract, that's going to come to roost a little bit. So I'm aware that Kevin Abrams and Joe Schoen, they're not going to break their backs for the future. I don't think they're sacrificing the future at all. But if you keep doing that, those guys are going to end up making a lot of money. So that means you just need to draft well, and you need to hit in the draft. You need Josh Azudu and Cordell Flott to be players throughout their rookie contracts. You need to draft well. So it puts a lot of pressure on them from that standpoint, but I'm just hoping that they're able to do that. And I remain optimistic on Josh Azudu and Cordell Flott, but I can't sit here and say they're definitely going to be starters this year, right? Like, I don't think.
Well, Azudu's that issue's got to clear up. Exactly. That would be, we're talking a neck here, which can be touch and go. And I haven't heard anything on that, where he's at with that, but I know they were optimistic he'd be okay, but still you got to see, we were wondering about that with Daniel Jones last year, if you remember correctly. So that's a big question mark. If God forbid that kid's career is done, and I hope it's not, now what do? You basically, that's another need you have to fill. So, a lot of question marks here. And, just going back to my point about the cap, Shane, that's why you're seeing probably a lot of these 1-year deals, because that's all you can really fit in. You can maybe make a splash here and there. Okereke was the splash, getting Waller, that was the splash. And quite honestly, I was surprised that they touched his contract, but it made sense because that was easy money they could get back. And they went and they spent it, obviously. So the cap situation, while better this year, still not ideal. And that goes back to 2 years ago when they spent all this money and kept printing up extra money to bring in all these free agents in an effort to be mulligans for all the draft picks they whiffed on. And they got nothing out of it.
They got nada out of it. And they were able they did that with a rookie contract at quarterback too. They don't have a rookie contract at quarterback anymore.
Yes. And that just, you go back and you look at all them, and I know hindsight's 2020, but that one was a whopper.
Which one was that?
Having your quarterback on a rookie contract and just trying to take the shortcut. I mean, it didn't work when they did it in 2014. It didn't work really in 2016 because they weren't able to sustain it. What made them think it was going to work 2 years ago and then you're bringing in Kyle Rudolph, who had an injury that was discovered during the physical, and you're saying, well, we do everything with class, so we're going to honor the contract. All right, that's admirable, but this is also a business, and you just kind of screwed yourself.
Yep.
So, I don't understand what they were thinking at the time, and in what universe does stocking up on free agents win you a championship? Didn't we learn anything from the Eagles dream team?
I guess not. Giants were very desperate. That's what I'll say. They were very desperate. And like we said, it was a lack of drafting for about a decade. Like the Giants are famous for not re-signing our own talent. And even the talented ones, the Giants opted to not re-sign. And then they went out and had really long careers with all of these other teams. I mean, who are some of the free agents the Giants have re-signed over the last decade and a half? It's like JPP, or free agents as in their draft picks. JPP, Odell, Sterling Shepard. There really hasn't been that many. So let's hope that this new regime, man, they can figure that out, because you're not going to win in the NFL if you're just spending a lot of money in free agency and not retaining your homegrown talent.
Yes. And I think they're on the right track, but it's going to take some time. So I have confidence in Joe Shane. So far, he hasn't done anything that's made me say, what are you doing, man? So fingers crossed that he brings this team a little closer to closing the gap with the Eagles, who, as you said, they had a loaded roster. They've been weakened, but Howie Roseman, he always has something up his sleeve. Dallas, I think they closed the gap tremendously with Dallas. So we'll have to see. Health is another issue. Making sure that these guys stay healthy, which was a problem last year and the year before that and the year before that. So, all right. Well, Nick, my friend, thank you so much for the great insight. I could sit here and talk literally for hours with you about football. You're just a fountain of knowledge. So I appreciate your knowledge. Giant fans, thank you for tuning into the Locked On Giants podcast. Make sure you are checking this young man's workout. He is doing draft profiles over on giantscountry.com, the site that I manage. He is on Big Blue View. He is on Big Blue Banter. You can follow him on Twitter. You'll see his Twitter handle below. He's also putting little film clips on. If you're not following him, please do so. You will not regret it. Would I steer you wrong? No, you know that by now. I wouldn't. So please give Nick a follow. Nick, my friend, thank you so much. Giant fans, we will talk to you again tomorrow.